This Notebook LM video explores the concept of theophobia, the fear of God, from clinical, personal, social, and academic perspectives. Defined as an irrational and persistent anxiety, theophobia goes beyond reverence or disbelief. Individuals experiencing theophobia often believe in God, but this belief becomes the source of their terror.
Today we're diving into a fear that doesn't come from spiders or heights, but from the very idea of God. It's called theophobia, and it sits at this really fascinating and honestly often tense crossroads of faith, psychology, and social debate.
Okay, so let's start with this question. What if the thing that's supposed to bring you the most comfort is also the source of your greatest terror? I mean, for some people, that's not a what if, it's their daily reality. So let's really dig into what that feels like.
All right, so to really get a handle on theophobia, we first have to be on the same page about what a phobia actually is, from a clinical standpoint. So let's start right there. And pay close attention to the words here. A phobia isn't just, being scared of something. It's defined as an intense, irrational, and persistent fear. And that word disproportionate, that's the key. It means the fear has just completely spiraled way, way beyond any actual danger.
See, phobias don't just pop up out of nowhere. They're a recognized type of anxiety disorder, and they can come from a few different places. Maybe a really traumatic event, something in your genetic makeup, or even behaviors we learn from the people around us growing up.
The good news is there are really effective treatments out there. One of the big ones is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's this pretty structured process that starts with just figuring out the fear. How bad is it? Then you set clear goals, and then you get into some powerful techniques, like exposure therapy, where you gradually face the fear. And another one is cognitive restructuring, which is all about challenging and basically rewiring the thoughts that are fueling the phobia. It's all about taking back control.
Okay, so now that we've got that clinical background, let's apply it to the specific fear we're talking about today, the fear of God. Theophobia. I mean, the name says it all, right? It's literally from the Greek words for God and fear. But what's so important to remember is that we're talking about an unhealthy, persistent, and irrational fear. This is worlds away from a healthy respect. This is a kind of anxiety that can just take over your life.
And this is where we need to be super clear about what we're not talking about. Theophobia is not the fear of the Lord you might read about in the Bible or other texts. That's all about reverence and awe. And it's definitely not atheism, which is a lack of belief. In fact, a person with theophobia often deeply believes in God. That belief is the very thing that terrifies them.
So let's move away from the clinical definitions now and get to the really important part, the people. Let's hear directly from those who are actually living with this fear every single day.
I mean, just listen to the language in this quote. Human worm filled with evil and darkness. This isn't just being scared. This is a profound, deep-seated feeling of being completely worthless in front of a power that feels absolutely terrifying.
And this one, wow, it just perfectly captures the vicious cycle this phobia creates. You've got this painful loop of sinning, or at least thinking you've sinned, then this intense guilt, and then this constant expectation that you're about to be punished. Every little mistake becomes proof that the terror is real, and it traps you in what they call constant fear and sadness.
This last one really hits home, that feeling of being on trial 24/7. Can you imagine living your life believing you are one tiny slip-up away from eternal punishment? That constant pressure, that feeling of having to be on guard all the time, it leaves absolutely no room for mistakes and no sense of peace.
But, and this is a big but, the story of this word doesn't end there. The term theophobia has kind of been picked up and used in a totally different way, sparking this whole other debate about what it means to fear or to critique. So this is where everything kind of flips on its head. We've established that a clinical phobia is, by definition, an irrational fear. But what if the negative feeling isn't an irrational fear at all? What if it's a hostility that people feel is a perfectly rational response to things happening in the real world?
And this is a really important point about how language works, right? The suffix phobia has taken on this whole other life in our social and political conversations. It's often used not to describe a medical condition, but to call out prejudice, hatred, or just general hostility toward a group or an idea.
And this is exactly how the term gets reframed. You see it in online discussions, where some people argue that their negative feelings about organized religion aren't some irrational phobia. They see it as a justified animosity.
And they'll point to specific things like religion being used in politics or scientific ideas being rejected. Their whole point is, this isn't a phobia in my head. It's a rational critique based on real harm I see in the world.
So we're left with one word being used in three totally different ways: the clinical condition, the personal struggle, and the sociopolitical label. How in the world do we make sense of all these competing meanings?
And if you thought that was complicated, believe it or not, this whole debate has even made its way into the halls of academia. Researchers have actually identified another layer to this whole thing, and they've called it academic theophobia. Now, this version isn't a fear of God at all. It's about professional suspicion. It's this bias that some people have against researchers who are religious, questioning whether they can really be objective when they're studying their own faith. It basically suggests there's a kind of systemic phobia inside the very institutions that are supposed to be all about impartial study.
And that brings us right back to the central puzzle, doesn't it? We've seen how this one word, theophobia, can describe a debilitating mental health condition, a label for social anger, and even an academic bias. So where do you draw the line between a clinical phobia, a deep sense of reverence, and what some would call a totally justified critique? That question, it seems, points to one of the most complex and blurry lines of our time. Thanks for joining me for this one.